They say memory is selective, but in my family, forgetting was a luxury I was never allowed. My name is Claire, and at 46, I've learned that being the family historian, the one who remembers every slight, every promise broken, every moment of casual cruelty disguised as love, isn't a burden. It's a superpower. This is the story of how I discovered that sometimes the person everyone dismisses as too sensitive is actually the one who sees most clearly. And when you've spent a lifetime cataloging injustices, you learn exactly how to balance the scales. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, cream-colored cardstock with elegant gold lettering that screamed expensive taste and careful planning. My brother Daniel's daughter Emma was getting married, and the family was gathering for what the invitation called an intimate celebration of love and legacy at the family estate in Martha's Vineyard. I held the invitation in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I taught myself to cook at age 12 because Mom was always too busy managing Daniel's crisis du jour to worry about dinner. The same kitchen where I'd done homework alone while Daniel got tutoring sessions that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The same kitchen where I'd celebrated my college acceptance letter by myself because the family was at Daniel's lacrosse championship. Intimate celebration. The phrase made me laugh, but not with humor. Nothing about my family had ever been intimate. We were performers, each of us playing roles that had been assigned decades ago and never questioned. Daniel was the golden son, charming and charismatic, whose failures were reframed as learning experiences and whose successes were celebrated as family triumphs. Mom was the devoted matriarch, whose love was distributed like a finite resource that somehow never reached me in equal measure. Dad was the provider, whose attention followed Mom's direction like a compass needle. And me? I was the reliable daughter, the one who remembered birthdays and organized family gatherings, who listened to everyone's problems and offered solutions that were rarely taken. I was the family's emotional infrastructure, invisible until something broke down. If you've ever felt like the family archivist, the one who remembers every broken promise while everyone else has convenient amnesia, you're not alone. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of women who refuse to let their stories be rewritten by people who never bothered to listen the first time. The wedding was still 3 months away, but I could already see how it would unfold. Daniel would give a speech about Emma's strength and independence, conveniently forgetting that I'd been the one to drive her to college when he was too busy with work. Mom would tear up talking about the family legacy, somehow overlooking the fact that I was the one who'd maintained relationships with extended family, while Daniel couldn't be bothered to return phone calls. Dad would beam with pride at his granddaughter's achievements, the same pride that had been notably absent during my own milestones. I set the invitation on my refrigerator, next to the photo from my promotion to senior partner at the law firm, a photo I'd taken myself, because no family member had been available to celebrate with me. Next to the article about the pro bono clinic I'd established for domestic violence survivors. Next to the thank you note from the literacy program I'd funded anonymously for 5 years. My achievements were documented but not celebrated, acknowledged but not treasured. I was 46 years old, and I was tired of being the family's best-kept secret. The call came 2 weeks later. Mom's voice carried that particular note of frazzled concern that always preceded a request for me to fix something Daniel had broken. "Claire, honey, I hope you're sitting down. We have a bit of a situation with Emma's wedding." I wasn't sitting down, but I moved to the couch anyway. "What kind of situation?" "Well, you know how Emma and her fiancé wanted to have the reception at the house. It's always been Daniel's dream to host a wedding there, and we've been planning for months." The house. The Martha's Vineyard estate that had been in Dad's family for 3 generations. The same house where I'd spent childhood summers feeling like a visitor in my own family's space, where Daniel's friends were always welcome, but mine were somehow too loud, too messy, too much. What's the problem? Daniel's been having some financial difficulties. The business hit some rough patches, and he's had to liquidate some assets. He couldn't keep up with the maintenance on the house, and there are some structural issues that need to be addressed before we can host a large event. I waited, knowing what was coming next. The contractors say it will cost about $80,000 to make the necessary repairs. Daniel's tapped out, and your father and I have already stretched our budget helping him through this rough patch. So you're asking me to pay for the repairs? Oh, Claire, you know it's not that simple. This is about family, about Emma's special day. You're the only one in a position to help right now, and you've always been so generous. Generous. The word stung because it was true and because it was weaponized. I had always been generous with my family, stepping in whenever there was a crisis, covering expenses that weren't my responsibility, and providing solutions to problems I hadn't created. Have you asked Daniel to contribute anything? Honey, you know Daniel's situation. He's barely keeping his head above water. Besides, this is really an investment in the family property. You'll benefit from the improvements too. I would benefit, theoretically. In the same way, I'd benefited from all the family investments that somehow never included my input, but always included my financial contributions. I need to think about it. Of course. But Claire, you know how important this is to Emma. She's been dreaming of this wedding since she was a little girl. Emma, my niece, whom I genuinely loved despite the complicated feelings I had about her father. Emma, who had called me crying at 2 a.m. during her sophomore year of college when Daniel had been too busy to return her calls about choosing a major. Emma, who had asked me to be her maid of honor before Daniel had convinced her that tradition dictated it should be her sister-in-law instead. After I hung up, I sat in my living room surrounded by the life I'd built for myself. Books from floor to ceiling, art I'd chosen carefully over the years, furniture that reflected my taste rather than family expectations. It was a beautiful space, peaceful and intentional, filled with evidence of a life lived on my own terms. But it was also a space I'd inhabited alone for most of my adult life, not because I couldn't maintain relationships, but because I'd spent so much energy managing my family's emotional needs that I'd had little left for my own. I opened my laptop and began to type. Mom, I've thought about your request regarding the house repairs for Emma's wedding. I'm willing to pay the $80,000, but I have some conditions. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. For 46 years, I'd been the family's problem solver, stepping in to provide solutions without asking for anything in return. But this time would be different. First, I want the repairs to be documented and the property deed updated to reflect my financial contribution. If I'm investing in the family property, I want that investment to be legally recognized. Second, I want a formal apology from Daniel for the pattern of behavior that led to this situation. Not a casual, sorry things got tough, but an acknowledgement of how his financial irresponsibility has repeatedly impacted the family. Third, I want to give a speech at Emma's wedding. Not as the generous aunt who saved the day, but as a family member whose contributions have been consistently overlooked and undervalued. If these conditions are acceptable, I'll write the check. If not, I suggest you explore other options for funding the repairs. I read the email 3 times before sending it, each reading making me more certain that I was doing the right thing. For the first time in my adult life, I was attaching conditions to my generosity. I was asking for something in return. The response came 6 hours later from Daniel's email address instead of Mom's. Claire, I just spoke with Mom about your email. I have to say, I'm disappointed. This is Emma's wedding we're talking about, not some business transaction. I know you've been successful in your career, but that doesn't give you the right to hold the family hostage over money. I'm going through a difficult time right now, and instead of supporting me like family should, you're making demands and forcing me to grovel. That's not the Claire I grew up with. I think you need to examine your priorities. Family should come first, not your ego. I read Daniel's email twice, feeling the familiar pattern of manipulation wash over me. My reasonable request for acknowledgement and accountability had been reframed as selfishness. My desire for basic respect had been characterized as ego. My willingness to help had been taken for granted while my conditions had been dismissed as unreasonable. It was the same pattern that had defined our relationship for 4 decades. Daniel created problems, I provided solutions, and somehow I was always the one who needed to examine my behavior. But this time, I wasn't backing down. I forwarded Daniel's email to Mom and Dad, adding a single line. This response tells me everything I need to know about Daniel's willingness to take responsibility for his actions. My offer stands as originally stated. The next few weeks were tense. Mom called repeatedly, trying to negotiate modified versions of my conditions. Could I accept a private apology instead of a public one? Could I make a small speech instead of a substantial one? Could I trust that the family would remember my contribution without requiring legal documentation? Each call revealed more about the family dynamics than years of therapy had uncovered. My requests weren't unreasonable, but they were unprecedented. I had never asked for formal recognition before, never demanded accountability, never insisted on equal treatment. My conditions weren't about the money. I could afford the repairs without financial hardship. They were about establishing a new pattern of interaction, one where my contributions were valued rather than expected, acknowledged rather than taken for granted. 3 weeks before the wedding, Dad called. "Claire, I think we need to talk about the situation. Your mother is beside herself, Emma is stressed about the wedding, and Daniel is angry." "I'm sure he is. He's not used to being held accountable for his actions." "That's not fair. You know Daniel's been struggling." "Dad, Daniel is 48 years old. He's been struggling with the consequences of his own choices for most of his adult life, and the family has been enabling him by constantly providing bailouts without expecting anything in return. You're his sister. Family helps family. I've been helping this family my entire life. The difference is that this time, I'm asking for something in return. Basic respect, acknowledgement, and accountability. If that's too much to ask, then maybe we need to reconsider what family means." Dad was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother thinks you're having some kind of midlife crisis." I laughed, but it wasn't bitter. Maybe I am. Maybe realizing that I deserve better treatment from my own family is exactly the kind of crisis I needed to have. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received an email from Emma. "Aunt Claire, I know there's been tension about the wedding costs, and I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done for our family over the years. I also want you to know that I've asked Dad to apologize to you properly, not because you're paying for the repairs, but because you deserve an apology for how you've been treated. I love you, and I want you at my wedding regardless of whether the repairs get done. We can have the reception somewhere else if we need to. What matters to me is having the people I love there to celebrate. P.S. I've always thought you should give a speech at my wedding. You know me better than anyone, and you've been more of a consistent presence in my life than most people realize." Emma's email moved me to tears. Not because she was taking my side, but because she saw me clearly. She understood that this wasn't about money or control, but about recognition and respect. The breakthrough came 5 days before the wedding. Daniel called me directly, his voice lacking its usual confident charm. "Claire, I need to talk to you. Can we meet for coffee?" We met at a small cafe near my office, neutral territory where the conversation couldn't be derailed by family dynamics or childhood memories. Daniel looked older than his 48 years, worn down by stress and circumstances that were largely of his own making. "I've been thinking about what you said, about accountability and responsibility. And I've been thinking about Emma's email, about how she sees our family dynamics." I waited, not willing to make this easier for him. "I owe you an apology. Not just for the situation, but for a lot of things. I know I've taken advantage of your generosity over the years. I know the family has treated you like the solution to every problem without acknowledging what that cost you." He paused, staring into his coffee cup. "I also know that you've been carrying this family emotionally for decades, and instead of being grateful, we've acted like it was your job. Like you owed us that level of support." I felt something shift inside me, a tension I'd carried for years beginning to loosen. "I don't know how to fix everything that's gone wrong between us, but I want to try. And I want Emma's wedding to be a celebration where everyone feels valued, including you." "What does that look like, practically?" "It looks like me standing up at the rehearsal dinner and telling everyone exactly what you've contributed to this family, not just financially, but emotionally. It looks like me acknowledging that I've been irresponsible with money and that your bailouts enabled that irresponsibility. It looks like me treating you like the successful, accomplished woman you are instead of the little sister who's supposed to fix my problems." For the first time in our adult relationship, Daniel was seeing me clearly. Not as a resource to be managed, but as a person who deserved respect. "And the property deed? Already drawn up. You're now a co-owner of the Martha's Vineyard house, with full rights and responsibilities. It should have happened years ago." The wedding was beautiful. The repairs had been completed flawlessly, and the old house gleamed with fresh paint and careful restoration. Emma looked radiant, surrounded by family and friends who had gathered to celebrate her new beginning. But the moment that mattered most to me came during the rehearsal dinner, when Daniel stood up to speak. "Before we toast Emma and her future husband, I want to talk about family. Specifically, I want to talk about my sister Claire, who has been the backbone of this family for as long as I can remember." The room fell quiet, surprised by the direction of his speech. Claire has been bailing me out of financial disasters for 20 years, organizing family gatherings that brought us together, and providing emotional support to everyone in this room at various times. She's done all of this quietly, without asking for recognition or credit. He turned to look at me directly. I've taken advantage of her generosity, her confidence, and her love. I've assumed that because she was strong, she didn't need support. Because she was successful, she didn't need acknowledgement. Because she was reliable, she didn't deserve gratitude. My throat tightened, not from sadness, but from relief. Someone was finally seeing me, speaking the truth about our family dynamics. The repairs to this house were paid for by Claire, but that's just the most recent example of how she's invested in this family. She's invested her time, her energy, her resources, and her heart. And instead of treating her contributions as gifts, we've treated them as obligations. Daniel raised his glass. So before we toast the bride and groom, I want to toast Claire, the most generous, capable, and overlooked member of this family. Thank you for everything you've done, and I'm sorry it took me this long to say it publicly. The room erupted in applause, and I saw something I'd rarely seen before: genuine recognition from my family. Not just polite acknowledgement, but real appreciation for who I was and what I'd contributed. When I stood to give my own speech later that evening, I spoke about Emma's strength and independence, about the importance of choosing partners who see us clearly and value us fully. But I also spoke about the importance of family members who are willing to grow, to acknowledge their mistakes, and to change patterns that no longer serve anyone. The wedding reception was a celebration in every sense of the word. Emma and her husband were radiant, surrounded by love and hope for the future. But it was also a celebration of a family that had finally learned to see all of its members clearly. As the evening wound down, I found myself on the porch of the house I now partly owned, looking out at the ocean and reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. Mom joined me, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. I owe you an apology too, she said without preamble. I've treated you like you were stronger than everyone else, like you didn't need the same support and attention I gave Daniel. I convinced myself that because you were successful, you were fine. But success doesn't mean someone doesn't need love and recognition. I accepted the champagne, feeling the last of my old resentments dissolve. I did need those things. I still do. I know. And I want to do better. We all do. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the waves crash against the shore. The house behind us was filled with the sound of family celebrating, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged to that celebration completely. 6 months later, I received a photo from Emma's honeymoon in Italy. She and her husband were laughing at a cafe table, holding glasses of wine and looking completely happy. The caption read, "Thinking of you, Aunt Claire. Thank you for teaching me that love means seeing someone clearly and valuing them fully." I framed the photo and put it on my desk at work, next to the other mementos of a life well lived. But this one was different. This one represented not just my own achievements, but the achievement of being seen and valued by the people who mattered most. The family dynamics didn't change overnight. Old patterns have a way of reasserting themselves, and growth is rarely linear. But something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer the invisible family member, the one whose contributions were expected but unacknowledged. More importantly, I had learned to value myself enough to demand better treatment, to attach conditions to my generosity, to insist on respect rather than simply hoping for it. The daughter who remembered everything had finally learned the most important lesson of all: some memories are worth preserving, but others are worth rewriting. And sometimes, the person everyone thought was too sensitive to handle the truth is actually the only one strong enough to demand it. Being the family historian had taught me to document injustices, but it had also taught me to recognize justice when it finally arrived. And after 46 years of being overlooked, being seen felt like the greatest victory of all. If Claire's story resonates with you, if you've ever felt like the family member who gives without receiving, who remembers what everyone else conveniently forgets, who provides solutions without getting credit, know that you're not alone. Share your experiences in the comments below, and if this story spoke to you, consider subscribing to join our community of women who refuse to be invisible in their own families. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply insist on being seen.